did not know personally more than a couple of hundred people in the parish at the outside, and it was only at the houses of very few of these that he ever visited. But then Pryer had such a strong objection on the principle to house visitations. What a drop in the sea were those with whom he and Pryer were brought into direct communication in comparison with those whom he must reach and move if he were to produce much effect of any kind, one way or the other. Why, there were between 15,000 and 20,000 poor in the parish, of whom but the merest fraction ever attended a place of worship. Some few went to dissenting chapels, a few were Roman Catholics. By far the greater number, however, were practically infidels, if not actively hostile, at any rate indifferent to religion, while many were avowed atheists, admirers of Tom Paine, of whom he now heard for the first time. But he never met and conversed with any of these. Was he really doing everything that could be expected of him? It was all very well to say that he was doing as much as any other young clergyman did. That was not the kind of answer which Jesus Christ was likely to accept. Why, the Pharisees themselves in all probability did as much as the other Pharisees did. What he should do was to go into the highways and byways and compel people to come in. Was he doing this? Or were not they rather compelling him to keep outside their doors at any rate? He began to have an uneasy feeling as though ere long, unless he kept a sharp lookout, he should drift into being a sham. True, all would be changed as soon as he could endow the College for Spiritual Pathology. Matters, however, had not gone too well with the things that people bought in the place that was called the Stock Exchange. In order to get on faster, it had been arranged that Ernest should buy more of these things than he could pay for, with the idea that in a few weeks, or even days, they would be much higher in value, and he could sell them at a tremendous profit. But unfortunately, instead of getting higher, they had fallen immediately after Ernest had bought, and obstinately refused to get up again. So, after a few settlements, he had got frightened, for he read an article in some newspaper which said they would go ever so much lower, and, contrary to Pryer's advice, he insisted on selling, at a loss of something like £500. He had hardly sold when up went the shares again, and he saw how foolish he had been, and how wise Pryer was, for if Pryer's advice had been followed he would have made £500 instead of losing it. However, he told himself he must live and learn. Then Pryer made a mistake. They had bought some shares, and the shares went up delightfully for about a fortnight. This was a happy time indeed, for by the end of a fortnight the lost £500 had been recovered, and £300 or £400 had been cleared into the bargain. All the feverish anxiety of that miserable 6 weeks, when the £500 was being lost, was now being repaid with interest. Ernest wanted to sell and make sure of the profit, but Pryer would not hear of it. They would go ever so much higher yet, and he showed Ernest an article in some newspaper which proved that what he said was reasonable, and they did go up a little, but only a very little, for then they went down, and Ernest saw first his clear profit of £300 or £400 go, and then the £500 loss, which he thought he had recovered, slipped away by falls of a half and one at a time, and then he lost £200 more. Then a newspaper said that these shares were the greatest rubbish that had ever been imposed upon the English public, and Ernest could stand it no longer, so he sold out, again this time against Pryer's advice, so that when they went up, as they shortly did, Pryer scored off Ernest a second time. Ernest was not used to vicissitudes of this kind, and they made him so anxious that his health was affected. It was arranged, therefore, that he had better know nothing of what was being done. Pryer was a much better man of business than he was, and would see to it all. This relieved Ernest of a good deal of trouble, and was better after all for the investments themselves. For, as Pryer justly said, a man must not have a faint heart if he hopes to succeed in buying and selling upon the Stock Exchange, and seeing Ernest nervous made Pryer nervous too. At least he said it did. So the money drifted more and more into Pryer's hands. As for Pryer himself, he had nothing but his curacy and a small allowance from his father. Some of Ernest's old friends got an inkling from his letters of what he was doing, and did their utmost to dissuade him, but he was as infatuated as a young lover of 22. Finding that these friends disapproved, he dropped away from them, and they, being bored with his egotism and high-flown ideas, were not sorry to let him do so. Of course, he said nothing about his speculations. Indeed, he hardly knew that anything done in so good a cause could be called speculation. At Battersby, when his father urged him to look out for a next presentation, and even bought 1 or 2 promising ones under his notice, he made objections and excuses, though always promising to do as his father desired very shortly. Chapter 56. By and by a subtle, indefinable malaise began to take possession of him. I once saw a very young foal trying to eat some most objectionable refuse, and unable to make up its mind whether it was good or no. Clearly it wanted to be told. If its mother had seen what it was doing, she would have set it right in a moment, and as soon as ever it had been told that what it was eating was filth, the foal would have recognized it and never have wanted to be told again. But the foal could not settle on the matter for itself, or make up its mind whether it liked what it was trying to eat or no, without assistance from without. I suppose it would have come to do so by and by, but it was just wasting time and trouble which a single look from its mother would have saved, just as wort will in time ferment of itself, but will ferment much more quickly if a little yeast will be added to it. In the matter of knowing what gives us pleasure we are all like wort, and if unaided from without can only ferment slowly and toilsomely. My unhappy hero about this time was very much like the foal, or rather he felt much like what the foal would have felt if its mother and all the other grown-up horses in the field had vowed that what it was eating was the most excellent and nutritious food to be found anywhere. He was so anxious to do what was right, and so ready to believe that everyone knew better than himself, that he never ventured to admit to himself that he might be all the while on a hopelessly wrong tack. It did not occur to him that there might be a blunder anywhere, much less did it occur to him to try and find out where the blunder was. Nevertheless, he became daily more full of malaise, and daily, only he knew it not, more ripe for an explosion should a spark fall upon him. One thing, however, did begin to loom out of the general vagueness, and to this he instinctively turned as trying to seize it. I mean the fact that he was saving very few souls, whereas there were thousands and thousands being lost hourly all around him, which a little energy such as Mr. Hawke's might save. Day after day went by, and what was he doing? Standing on professional etiquette, and praying that his shares might go up and down as he wanted them, so that they might give him money enough to enable him to regenerate the universe. But in the meantime the people were dying. How many souls would not be doomed to endless ages of the most frightful torments that the mind could think of, before he could bring his spiritual pathology engine to bear upon them?